and bolts. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, Benny Boy. Always bringing the heat. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cats and Bolts, Season 2, Episode 11. And as you can see, Mr. Peterson is not here, which means none of this nonsense. I'm going to set that to the side in memory. There we go. But fortunately, we've been able to be joined by the one and only Jeff Chychrun. He's joining us today. And I just want to jump right into it because I feel like we're pretty much almost a quarter of the way through the season. We're getting to that quarter of the way point, and I feel like there's just a lot of good stuff to talk about. But first and foremost, Jeff, what have you been up to since last season ended?
Yeah, well, I wasn't here for we did the first round of the playoffs, and then I went national TNT and ESPN, and so we stuck around through parts. I actually did a trip to Scotland. We stuck around through the third round, and then we were hosting my daughter's wedding in Ottawa. We got a cottage 40 miles west of town, so there was a lot to get done. My wife will say I did nothing up until the wedding day other than keep the grass green. She's probably right. But yeah, so we had a lot of planning to do, so we left. The nice part was I was so excited. I was actually in Philly for the Alumni golf tournament the night of the final. And sitting around with a bunch of guys sort of post-golf tournament, and I was kind of screaming my head off at the TV. I was pretty excited for Game 7, and I understand sort of where I played a couple games for the Oilers, so I understand that it's difficult winning, it's difficult losing, right? It's no different than when Gretz walked down the hallway after the Islanders beat them and realized just how hard you had to work to win that Stanley Cup. But anyways, it's pretty exciting being around a bunch of my peers in Philly. Saw the Stanley Cup, saw them win it. I was jumping up and down, and so I was home. I flew back to Ottawa, and I was at the cottage. I was actually at the marina picking up my son's boat because him and his now fiance were coming to the cottage for Canada Day, and a few days shortly after, and my phone rang, and it was Adlin with the Panthers, and she said, "Chych, are you going to be here for the Stanley Cup?" Right? I'm like, "Oh my God, it's 2 days. I can't miss it." So of course I flew down. Spectacular event. Must have been out there. Was 250,000 people, 200,000 people along A1A
In the monsoon.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Moeller, Billy Lindsay, Katie Engelson, Randy's wife, Billy's wife were on the back of the Ford truck. And we're looking out east, and it looked like Hurricane Wilma was coming straight at us, right? Like, the heck is this going to work? But you know what? As hot as it was, we were pretty chilly by the end of the day. And, Jova's son Cole was with us, too. Cole had a big smile on his face the whole time. It was pretty great. Great for him to share with his son.
It's funny you talk about, we were just talking about before we got on the air, talking about like how, we were talking about Wayne, because that's obviously my favorite subject. And I was telling you the story about how I met Wayne.
One of my favorite subjects, too.
Okay, well, we could just change this podcast right now to 99 only. I'd be fine. But we were talking about what a good person he is. And you're like, there's still a little bit of Brantford in him. And we talked about Jacob. It was Jacob's boat. You were getting, we just can't leave.
No.
We can't, we go back. We go back to our roots.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important too, right? I remember talking to another former Oiler, Keith Acton, way back when I was playing in Philly, and looked up to Woody. I was 22, he was probably 32, but he really had a lot of knowledge, and it's no surprise he ended up being a very successful coach in the NHL for a long time. He actually ran for mayor of Stouffville, Ontario, his hometown.
I did not know that. Okay,
I don't know that he won. But he was always preaching to us about real estate and about a whole bunch of other things. But he always talked about the reason he went home in the summertime. Well, I think him and his wife, Susan, they were from the same area, north of Toronto. But it gave you some continuity and some sense of because, Philly was probably his fourth or fifth team. Gave you some sense of home and some place to grow roots, actually, because he never had a chance during his career to really settle in for a long period of time. He played in Montreal a number of years, Minnesota, I don't know how many he was in Edmonton, couple Stanley Cup runs, but just a sense of belonging and community wherever he was, and somewhere to go in the off season. And so, yeah, but I'm from Eastern Ontario. My dad's roots are from Western Canada, like you. we hopped in the car every July 1st and spent a month out visiting my grandparents, my Baba and my Dido, my Ukrainian grandparents, and it was just part of our culture. It's just what we did, right? And so yeah, it's just part of family, part of belonging, part of community, right? So and my wife's a Long Island girl. She loves the Ottawa Valley now in the summertime. She probably loves it more than I do. It's her little piece of utopia. We leave Boca, head up there for the summer, and we're just getting back now.
Yeah, I wouldn't trade being from Saskatchewan for anything in the world. I wouldn't trade it. The people are good, and it's just a place, it's a good place to be
Something
from.
about that proud green nation, right?
Yeah.
Do they flock Regina on game day for the Rough Riders?
Yes, it's an experience being
Yeah.
in Regina when there's a Rider game. It's an experience the whole day. Okay, let's get down to some real hockey talk. Getting really into the season so far, I think somebody's played 19 games already. New Jersey, I think. Somebody's played 19 games, and the other
good.
teams are like 14, 15, 16, that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about a couple of, I guess, maybe surprises. Out of the West, the LA Kings. We had Dale Talon on last year, and he talked about how talented the Kings were and whatever, but I didn't see them leading their division at this point in the season.
Yeah, I can't say I did either. And I followed them quite intently the past few years. First of all, I'm friends with Rob Blake and Luc Robitaille, so that's enough to really sort of spark my interest. At one point, there was a bit of talk of my son ending up playing there. So I followed them quite closely. But yeah, so with the changes, right, they moved on. Jimmy Hiller's coaching now, DJ Smith running the defense. Some more familiarity for me. But you sort of lose Doughty in preseason. You got a bunch of young guys on defense. What's a 92? He's from Ottawa. I can't think of his name right now. Really stepped in, sort of been a good right shot presence. Mikey Anderson playing really well for them. In Washington, we have Pierre-Luc Dubois. So how are they going to replace him? They obviously got Darcy Kemper. We were with Kemper in Arizona when my son was there. I thought he was just a spectacular puck stopper, big body. I don't know that they're expecting him to play that well either. Center ice, they're deep with Kopitar, with Dano. But obviously they're buying into what the new coaching staff. I mean, Jimmy Hiller did a really good job when he'd taken over last year, sort of treading water, getting them to the playoffs. It's funny how when I played, I thought teams that didn't make the playoffs or didn't win the first round of the playoffs that's when coaching changes were made, right? Today, there's a lot of really good teams don't make the playoffs. So the fact that they made the playoffs, it's an accomplishment. I mean, half the league doesn't get in, right? So, yeah, but I'd say they are a surprise. And that West is tough, right? With Vegas, with Dallas. Colorado's sort of struggled out of the gate. They're picking it up now, too. Calgary, I think, has been a bit of a surprise, probably. I'm not sure how they've done the past week. You expect Vancouver to be good. How about the Winnipeg Jets? I didn't see that coming.
That was on my list.
Let's talk about it, right?
Definitely going to talk about Winnipeg, because even last year, the one thing that I stood very firm on, and I do again this year, teams in the West are stronger than teams in the East. The West is just tougher to get out of and has been as of late. We haven't even brought up the Dallas Stars yet, and they're a phenomenal hockey club. They always are for some reason. But Winnipeg, first team, fastest team to 30 points ever. They're 15-1. When you look at the standings, it's not even close. Talk to me about what you think is the reason behind that and how long it's going to last.
Yeah. So my stepmom's from Winnipeg. Again, my dad's a Saskatchewan man. I drove through Winnipeg there and back, I don't know, probably 15 times in my lifetime from Ottawa. So I've got a sensitive spot for the Winnipeg Jets. It's not a place a lot of free agents want to go to, quite frankly. It could be the Canadian dollar, it could be the Winters. It just is. I heard Kevin Cheveldayoff sort of almost intimate it the other day, but then preaching the great values that you find in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I think they have their challenges, but I think what they did really smartly a year ago, they locked up their goaltender, obviously one of the best goaltenders in the world. They locked up Scheifele down the middle. They got Kyle Connor locked up. their core pieces are really playing well. I think it shows the commitment from ownership that they're going to pay a price, and it sort of locks in that culture, I think, right? And that sort of trends downhill into the locker room, and the guys. I was talking to Gabe Velarde's agent, same agent as my son. I said, how's Gabe like it there? He says he loves it, and I don't think that's said enough. Just how much the players actually love playing there once they get there, because everybody has their no trade lists, and unfortunately, I think a lot of the Canadian markets are on a lot of the no trade lists simply because of the exchange on the dollar and the tax situation. And so places like Winnipeg get beat up with that stuff. So I think there's a little bit of you can have a chip on your shoulder too playing there. But I think it's a city that's really paid the price. They've had some difficult maybe playoff losses too that I think they've learned from, not unlike the Florida Panthers have. And I think their core, they're just in that area right now where they're ready to sort of thrive, and they've learned from, like, again, playoff loss and winning is muscle memory. And I think they're in a position now where they're ready to take that next step because they've sort of been in those tough situations. And again, they've learned to grind it just to get to the playoffs.
I agree. And thinking about the players that they have, you go back, I think that the teams, those specific franchises like 30, 40 years ago, set the tone for the expectation in the city now. So when you have guys like Dale Hawerchuk and Phil Housley on your team, you're expected to do a lot of things and have guys like that. And now, not that Kyle Connor is the same player as Dale Hawerchuk, but the work ethic is there. Kyle Connor is so fun to watch. And I think that the Winnipeg fans appreciate the work ethic, if nothing else.
Yeah, I agree. And they build it from within. I think Josh Morrissey probably is a very underrated player.
Absolutely.
He's a great defenseman. And so that all trickles down. Neil Pionk's having a career season. So, yeah, so all those players, they have those experiences now. They take pride in wearing that jersey. I think they love playing for Rick Bowness, who just moved. He's here, a full-time Floridian now. And I think Scott Arniel has kind of continued that sort of, culture, sort of similar, but with his own tweaks. I mean, I think Scotty coached Columbus a few years ago. He's had a chance to learn from he's been a professional coach for a long time. And I think they like the culture, and there's a lot of buy-in in Winnipeg. It appears to me early, obviously, with their record.
It's funny because 30 years ago, guys like Dale Hawerchuk, whatever, Phil Housley's an American. You didn't hear guys go, I don't want to go play there. Yeah. Don't make me go play there. It wasn't even a conversation.
Yeah. Well, it might have been.
Just nobody, there was no social media.
Honestly, the Canadian dollar's been beat up so often. It trends, it increases and decreases the exchange. And I think that trickles in. But I think what the NHL did a bunch of years ago was all contracts became paid in U.S. dollars, and that makes a real difference. And there's some programs like the RCA Trust where players can sort of defer their tax burden and actually end up paying tax similar to what they would in whatever state they came from the United States. So that helps bring players in. And I'm sort of getting off topic a little bit, but listen, Winnipeg, it's just a great sports town, right? You look at the Blue Bombers, you look at the Jets. Even going back to the World Hockey Association with Bobby Hull, Hedberg, Nielsen, I mean, Lars Erik Sjoberg, I believe, on defense. They had some great clubs, and they sort of got pillaged when they made the transition to the NHL. The NHL didn't give them a very good deal. All the players that had NHL rights went off to their NHL teams that they played in, and they sort of had to start from square one again. So it wasn't an easy transition for them.
I feel like we could have a whole podcast on the good Swedes that used to play in the league. But
so
we
many.
could go
great
many
Swedes.
When you said Nielsen.
Yeah.
But kind of moving on from Winnipeg. So obviously they're having a fire starter of a year. I want to look and talk about the maybe surprises-ish in the scoring race. Not that it's a race, but I'm scoring leaders. And when Minnesota was here, and we were up in the press box, and I said to Jonah, who in the press box, I said, watch 97 for Minnesota. Just watch him. If you don't even know what you're watching for, just watch him. I said, he's going to be the best player on the ice. Boom, in the net. Boom, assist. He's like, was that? He looks across the thing at me. He's like, was that the 97? I go, I told you. And look at him. Up until Nate McKinnon overtook him, Kaprizov was leading the league in points.
Yeah, isn't he electric?
He is unbelievable. Yeah. Last year when I saw him play here, I was floored by his talent. He's a typical Russian, like a bure. Yeah. Just that talent. And that Fedorov. Fedorov was a little, I don't want to say lazier in the way that he was lazy, but Fedorov barely moved and bang, the puck was in the net. But Kaprizov is unbelievable.
Yeah, just they almost get like a play action fake because the defenders are so afraid to commit to these guys because they can make them look so silly one-on-one. But they've got that, they've got the blinders are completely off, and it's almost like they can see the 360 degrees. And if they have support, they can make those passes that are incredible. But Kaprizov, I heard you mention Pavel Bure. Pavel was such a streak. He could go 200 feet so fast. He was like lightning. And yet Kaprizov can do that, but he can stop up and make so many plays that really make people look foolish. And like I said, with any kind of support, with his wingers going to get pucks or streaking down the side or defense being activated, he controls the 200 feet, doesn't he? He's really something else to watch, and he puts up points accordingly.
I feel like when they played that game here, I really feel like Minnesota probably should have won that game. It just, every time Kaprizov was on the ice, everybody else's head was on a swivel.
Yeah, it had to be. Yeah, it has to be. Who's he playing with? Is he playing with, I'm not even sure.
I forget.
Yeah, they have Brock Faber on the back end. He quarterbacks things nicely. They're strong in goal. Yeah, that's a team. They're an exciting team, and that's a team that under Billy Guerin made the coaching change, but I think they try to play the game the right way too. I think it's not unlike they do here, where Paul Maurice wants them to play responsibly defensively, but he doesn't want to handcuff them when they have pucks, and that's where a player like Kaprizov can really go and do his damage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I guess we'll talk about the Panthers because that's what this is about, but I wanted to specifically talk to you about the relationship between Barkov and Reinhart, because let's be honest, I don't think anybody saw 2 years ago Sam Reinhart putting up as many goals as he does. And now he's tied with Draisaitl for 12 goals. And Cole Caulfield, of all people, yeah. Cole Caulfield has 12 as well. But that Barkov-Reinhart combination, Barkov doesn't remind me of Kaprizov, but he's sneaky.
Oh yeah, I was watching Barkey sort of specifically last night coming through the neutral zone, and almost from he wasn't in full flight, but he got the full pace within like 3 strides, and it was just really impressive to see the power and the speed that a big man like that can go with. But to your point about Reinhart and Barkov, I remember broadcasting. Is this Reinhart's 3rd or 4th year here? And actually started him, I think, with Barkey, and then he went down to like the 3rd line for a little while, and I sort of questioned. I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to skate to keep pace with. I can't remember who else was with Barkey. It could have been Verhaeghe, but boy, was I wrong. But it didn't work right away. It took maybe a year or two, and then sort of going back to it on numerous occasions. Now you just see the hockey sense that Sam has. And how many goals does he have now?
12.
Like, some people probably thought last year was an outlier for him. He's always a consistent, 30-goal scorer. But is he a 50-goal scorer? He may be a 60-goal scorer this year, the way he's going. You can just see just the reads, and they complement each other so well. Another guy, Evan Rodriguez, I was never sure that he was a first-line player, but he just complements those guys so well. And then they sort of sprinkle it around a little bit. There are times when Verhaeghe may play with that top unit. They'll sort of, as Mo says, just to sort of create something may be stalled out. So just make a quick switch, just to make a switch to sort of spark the offense a little bit. But Rodriguez looked really good with that line last night, I thought, too. It's funny, last night I actually left the game. There's about 8 minutes left. I wanted to beat the rush out. I was tired. I'm still sort of adjusting to being back in Florida.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. But I walked out, And I was convinced in my head for whatever reason. I actually missed that it was 1-1. I ran in the men's room, came back, and Jersey scored. But for some reason in my head, as I was walking out, because at one point the shots were 20-7 halfway through the game for the Panthers. And I thought they were really dominating. And Jersey they're a really, really good rush club. They're really fast, but they're evolving too into that strong defensive group. And I thought, I thought the Panthers were ahead sort of when I left, but they were down 2-1. It was kind of funny. But the Panthers, and I sort of lost my train of thought here, Sarina. Where were we with this one?
New Jersey was, I don't know. How does your wife handle this?
Yeah, right.
You're talking about New Jersey being outshot 20-7 and then being just maybe a little bit more immature on the back end. But I think Florida is a more mature team.
Right.
Florida's becoming what Tampa was a few years ago. Florida's getting its maturity now. And New Jersey's going to get there. They have talent. They always seem to be missing something, though.
Yeah, and I think for them it's just sort of growing, right? You got Chychrun, and you've got Hughes in the middle, and those guys were drafted to be the stars and the leaders. I think they're really deep down the middle, and they've sprinkled it in with the Myers and some players like that. They've got a Florida kid on the back end, Seamus Casey. I think he was sent down, but he's an 04 Florida kid. But I like the group. I think Tommy Fitzgerald's had a few years to sort of get it right. They've got the big goaltender now with Markstrom. I think he can help lead them to the next level. And it's funny. It's like I always said during the broadcast, the NHL, it's not unlike minor hockey in that, come May, come June, on any given Sunday, there's only one team leaves happy. In 32 teams, only one team leaves happy in June, right? Everybody else is trying to figure it out. And, so I think that's sort of where it's an interesting comparison.
I think, too, thinking about teams that are growing a little bit, I'm always so impressed by Buffalo. The amount of talent. It's like watching Buffalo is like watching the World Juniors because it's all World Junior players, essentially. But when they all start to come together before those contracts get too big, I think they might be able to do a little bit of damage.
Yeah, I was talking to Kevin Adams here last year, sort of specifically about that, and he was sort of similar to the Ottawa Senators a year ago. He had three big left shot defensemen that, Ottawa said Sanderson, Chabot, my boy, and similar there with Dahlin and the kid from Colorado, and it was their first pick a couple years. Owen Power, very solid on the back end, right? A group you can really grow with. But they were, again, all left shots, but they've got the guys up front with Tage Thompson. I played with Tage's dad, actually. I actually knew when his mom and dad met each other sort of in Phoenix many years ago. But yeah, they're a club that I know Donnie Granado was trying to get them to sort of come together as a group, and he was probably the right guy to sort of develop the talents, and now they've passed it on back to Lenny to see if he can get them over. Maybe a little bit of tough love in that locker room now to see if he can get them over the top, but it's tough, right? Again, like we talked about earlier, there's 32 teams, only 16 make the playoffs, and there's a real fine line between winning and losing, and I like to go back to the Panthers winning. They had a lot of regular season success, some playoff heartache. Again, losing the final a year ago and then winning it. It's difficult to get in, and it's difficult to learn to win those playoff battles.
Absolutely. We were kind of carrying on the topic of having a strong coach. Yeah. We were talking earlier about my conversation with Keith Jones. And when Philly was here last week, and I asked him about Tortorella. How's Tortorella as a coach for you guys right now? He's like, he's the right coach for us right now. We need a little bit of tough love. We need some of these guys to be in the position where they're not fearful of their coach, but they're scared. Mishkov was healthy scratch for the second game in a row.
What was that?
Tortorella's not playing around.
Right. And he has a history of doing this. I think he developed players in Tampa, developed players in New York. He did the similar thing in Vancouver. Some of the guys playing in Vancouver today got a little bit of tough love from Torts a few years ago, and they're probably benefiting from it today. But yeah, you know what? Listen, each team sort of evaluates, sees where they are. Coaches like to set a standard that the young players understand. Yeah, and I think if you go back to the mid '80s, I hate talking about when I played, but when I played, there were a lot of veterans on these hockey clubs that they sort of set that culture, right? And I remember going to Philly in '84, '85, and you had Hal McCrimmon, Marsh, Crossman, Poulin. You had a lot of guys on that hockey club that forced you to grow up and be man early. A lot of these hockey teams, we talked about the Buffaloes, that a bunch of young guys that are sort of growing up together, right? So maybe not necessarily having those older players that can sort of lead the way at times. I mean, even my son, I remember a couple of years ago, he's 24 years old, and he said, you know what, I'd still like to have a veteran guy like I can sort of lean on. So maybe Torts sort of morphs into that sort of voice in the locker room. I know you got your Sean Couturiers, who's been around a long time, been a great hockey player for that organization. They got a couple of other guys, Scott Lawton and players like that can kind of be that veteran presence. But maybe Torts feels that there's a little bit of that old school mentality missing, that bit of the tough love that you used to get from your peers, and maybe the coaches have to morph into that. Rocky Thompson, Brad Shaw, the other guys on that bench, they're old school hockey guys, and maybe that, in Jonesy's words, maybe that's what that team needs. We always joke about in the city of brotherly love being the toughest team in hockey. It's tough to be that in today's game, but I think a little bit of that certainly can go a long way.
I was actually watching Philly the other night thinking the best thing they could do right now in this game is go back to being the Broad Street Bullies. They need to hit more.
Oh, yeah. Good
but
point.
Like I said to Keith, we were talking about Tortorella being the right coach for them at the right time, being hard. And I said, I feel like there's not a lot of coaches out there that are hard anymore. He goes, well, the players are different now. And I think that has a lot to do with it. But I watched the players like Couturier and stuff like that, but I really felt like Konechny was a good leader on the ice for them. I don't always like in the dressing room, but he was just solid for them the other night. I think he took a puck in the ankle and he got up and kept going, and he's a Philadelphia Flyer in my opinion.
He is. And he's another guy that I have a history with. My son played with him in the World Under-17 tournament. Also traded, the Sarnia Sting traded for Travis from the Ottawa 67s. So, my son played a year and a half with him in the Ontario Hockey League, and he is an atypical Philadelphia Flyer, just snarly, just nasty, but he's got that skill level that the old Broad Street Bullies would have had, that would have really endear him, because he's 5'11", 6 foot maybe. He plays like he's 6'7" and tenacious. And for a guy that gives up 4 inches and 30 pounds on almost every check, a lot of times he's the big bark in that fight, the big dog in that fight. But he's willed himself to be an all-star in this league. And you're right. I think he brings a Philadelphia Flyer mentality to the rink every night.
We were talking about Keith Jones being in the running for the general manager job here when Bill Zito got it. And I was like, I had hired Keith Jones in a heartbeat, but Keith Jones is a Philadelphia Flyer.
Yeah.
And I think you're a Flyer.
Yeah.
It's like that's the first thing out of your mouth.
Yeah, right.
When he sees my jacket, he goes, I should have worn my Flyer alumni. That's how you can tell.
Yeah.
Like Wayne is an Oiler.
Yeah.
You're a Flyer. You can just see that about guys. And it's so interesting with when Steve Yzerman became the general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning, I was like, what? Steve Yzerman is a Red Wing. He did a fantastic job, but
yeah.
On we go. He's always going to be a Red Wing.
Right. And no surprise that the Ilitch family brought him back. Steve's another guy. He's from my hometown of Nepean, Ontario, right outside of Ottawa. A year older, we grew up together. Yeah, and he did a great job in Tampa, you're right. But people there's a certain identity, right? And there were a lot of times, it's nice that the Flyers sort of have, with Danny Briere coming back, with Jones, he's sort of running that group. There were times that the Flyers didn't have Flyers in their management, and once Bobby Clark left and Paul Holmgren left, and I think they sort of got away from that identity a little bit. And it's not just that. The Flyers alumni does so many things in the community too now, and we're a very strong group. They make it easy for the alumni to be involved. I think that'll breeds the identity. And the Flyers have an alumni that's very proud of what goes on the ice, and I think that there's a little bit of pressure from that in that city too, and it's important because it There's continuity. There's a connection to the past. And yet the Flyer alumni, they're very in tune and want that club to really succeed in the future.
Yeah, it's just the exact same thing with the Keith Jones and the Daniel Briere,
Yeah.
Luc Robitaille and Rob Blake.
Yeah.
It's identical in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it is.
They're kings. Luc Robitaille's a king. You know,
Yeah.
Rob Blake obviously played elsewhere, but he's a king.
I look at Robbie as a king as well.
Yeah.
No
don't
doubt
you?
about it. No doubt about it.
Cool. So I want to have a little bit of fun here. I was going to do this rapid fire, but I actually want to have conversations about some of these questions. So I did come up with a list of questions that I want to ask you, A, because I'm nosy, but B, I love these conversations. These are great. So my first question for you is, who was your favorite team growing up?
Oh, easy. I was a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. So in Ottawa at the time, it was only probably a 16 team league at one point, but 21 team league. And so that it was, and people, it seemed they were either Habs fans or Leaf fans in Eastern Ontario. And Montreal was closer. It was only 2 hours away. I was born in Montreal, but my dad, I have a great picture of my dad back in the day growing up in Good Eve, Saskatchewan, and they used to collect corn syrup labels, and they'd wrap a couple up and they'd ship it to the card company, and they'd send back pictures of hockey players. And so my dad, for whatever reason, maybe he got more Toronto Maple Leaf cards, but my dad was always a Leaf fan growing up. So fast forward to me growing up in Ottawa, I was a Leaf fan. And there's a great old picture of my dad, probably around 1945. He was born in 38. Outside the barn with his little nephew, who was almost my dad's age, because he was 19 years older today than his oldest sister. And my dad had that Toronto Maple Leaf sweater on that he probably mailed away to Mr. Eaton. And it was so cute. But anyway, I was a Leaf fan. Daryl Sittler was my favorite guy. Boreas Salming, Lanny McDonald, but they were my team. And talk about playoff heartache. When they made the playoffs, they got thumped pretty good every year. But that was my club.
My next question was going to be, who's your favorite player? If I had to pick, and I really thought about it, maybe I would have got to Daryl Sittler, but what a fantastic hockey player he was.
Yeah, he was great and tough. And, there was some tough years with Harold Ballard and a lot of public scrutiny. And he wore that C proudly and carried it with class. And Daryl's son, Ryan Sittler, works up here at the Ice Works and does a great job for that Breakers program, too.
I was just actually watching a Wendell Clark highlight video yesterday, and I was thinking about, man, they do not make them like that anymore.
No.
He would put them through the boards.
Yeah, he did. My teeth Wendell took a couple of my teeth out, but he didn't mean to. It was just a glove. It wasn't a stick. But yeah, no, what a tough guy. And just like, he's the type of guy, he just built like a brick
like this
house.
guy. He's built like this thing right here.
Yep.
He wasn't very big, but he was dense.
No, dense, exactly.
Yeah.
I saw him. He's a year younger than I am, Wendell. And I remember my last year junior, I was in Toronto. We were playing the Marlies. We went to the Leaf game that night. Wendell's an 18-year-old rookie, and he had this Donnybrook with Ben Wilson, and he just gave it to Ben. And Ben was one of the toughest guys playing for the Blackhawks that night. It was an impressive display of guts and tenacity, I must say.
I'm not sure I ever saw Wendell Clark actually lose a fight. Yeah. Even some of the Tillies he's had with Probert and all of those ones, some of them were pretty head to head. But I don't know if Wendell ever lost. Man,
I don't think he did either.
He was just something else. Yeah. But another Saskatchewan guy.
There you go.
Was
he Kelvington? Where was he from?
Yes, he is Kelvington. Kelvington, Saskatchewan, home of Wendell Clark. Okay, next question. Who was your favorite teammate of all time?
Oh man, that's a great question.
Isn't it? I come up with these all the time.
I don't know. I don't know who to say for that. I mean, obviously, I have some friends that, Derek Smith was my best man, and he was a teammate of mine in Philadelphia. There's some people like a Tony Granato in LA who just opened the door for so many people. Just a great human being, tenacious player. I really enjoyed my time listening to a 40-year-old Larry Robinson and a 38-year-old Dave Taylor coming in the locker room and just having the best time with each other, carpooling, and then just busting each other's chops, but being the first guys on and last guys off still at that time. Favorite player? God, that's tough. I'll tell you. So my favorite captain, and I play with Gretz. I play with Mario Lemieux. Dave Poulin has 2 daughters, Lindsay and Taylor, and it's not a surprise that my daughter's name is Taylor. I thought that much of David as a captain, but I had so many fit guys that I just love playing with, right? I mean, we all do. To me, hockey players are funny. They don't even know it sometimes. But I don't know that I can pick anyone.
That's okay. I love that you listed a bunch of players specifically.
Great influences.
Like a Dave Poulin or Tony Granato.
Yeah.
You know, he's another king.
Yeah.
But it kind of made me think, totally side noting here, how many good defensemen went through Los Angeles?
So many. Yeah,
like,
so many.
Larry Robinson's a hab, but man.
Larry Murphy was there. I played with Jay Wells in Philly as well. Doug Crossman. Did I say Larry Murphy? Paul Coffey was there with us for a while.
Wow.
You look at Blake. You look at Drew Doughty. They've had a bunch, and good teams. You know, a lot of teams like to say they start down the middle at that big center. I look at it a little bit differently. I think you have those big pillars on the blue line, and they really help solidify and help lead you. Of course, you don't win without a good goaltender either, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why Los Angeles won 2 Stanley Cups.
Yeah,
their
quick.
goaltending and their defensemen. The first time I saw Drew Doughty play, I picked up the phone. He was a rookie in Los Angeles. I was living there. I picked up the phone and I called my dad. You need to watch this kid. He is unbelievable.
Yeah, and he broke in at 18 as well. And they had some good vets with him. They had Sean O'Donnell. I think Jack Johnson might have been there still.
He was,
yeah.
Yep.
Jack was there. They had some other guys. Sort of sheltered him a little bit, but he took the reins at an early age and played a really mature game. Very offensively gifted, but I think he's pretty solid on the other side of the puck. But yeah, the Kings. I like the way they play. I think over the years they've had some coaching. Even when Sutter was there, McClellan. They're guys. I think they played to their strengths.
Yeah.
But obviously strong on the defense side.
I could carry on about coaching.
Yeah.
I love Todd McClellan. I feel like that poor guy just struggles and he's such a great coach.
I think he's a great coach. I think he's coached some great teams. He's developed some great players. And a lot of times it's timing too, right? I mean, for whatever reason, why don't great teams win every year? I think it's because there's 32 teams and there's such parity in this game. And on any given playoff schedule, you may not be the healthiest going to the final. So, or into any playoff round. So there's a lot of things coming to the mix.
Agreed. I'm going to lob some soft one at, yeah. What was your favorite pregame meal?
Oh, so we were talking about this with my son the other day because it's sort of evolved and he's not into the heavy pastas anymore. But boy, I mean, a pregame meal, it was so I probably never had chicken parmesan until I moved to this south of the border for whatever reason. It wasn't popular in Ottawa. Maybe there weren't enough Italian or chain restaurants that actually did. But as soon as I became a Hershey Bear of the American Hockey League, I saw the guys eating this chicken parm, and as soon as I tried it, I was hooked. So it was chicken parm. If we were making it at home, it was just sort of grilled chicken. And pasta, salad, maybe grill up some vegetables or bake them in the oven, and maybe you melt a little cheese whiz on them at the time, right? And it's not like today. I go watch my son. I'm going to Washington or Arizona or Ottawa, wherever it was. I'm blown away at the food. They've got full-time cooks at the rink. These guys don't have to cook at any time if they don't want to. They bring home so much food from the rink. I can't imagine how much is wasted. But the old days when I played, yeah, we were kind of self-sufficient.
That's really fun. It's interesting how much, like you said, how much the game has evolved and what the players eat and whatever. There's so much science that goes into what you need to put in your body and whatever else. So I was just kind of curious what yours was. Second last question. Where was your favorite place to play on the road?
Yeah.
What road barn did you like to play in?
So to me, and there's a lot of people have their opinions on this, but to me, there was no building like the Montreal Forum. You know, I played in the Spectrum, which was spectacular, Madison Square Garden, all those original 6 buildings, Chicago Stadium, Boston Garden. They all had their own intricacies and their own dimensions of the ice too, right? I never played in the Olympia, but Joe Louis had it too. But to me, Montreal was always the capital of hockey worldwide. And that's just the way I looked at it. So to play in the Forum, to play playoff series against the Habs, and they were such a dominant club forever in my childhood. And then even, turning pro, we lost in the semis in 80, 89 or whatever the heck it was. And Flyers had a big playoff with them in 87, and just the dominance and the 25 or 26 cups, whatever they won. That Montreal Forum was electric. And as a young boy, my dad, spent as a young man, when he was courting my mom in Ottawa, my dad started working in Nortel, and he's living in Montreal. So I know he's going to the Forum, and he'd tell me he'd buy these standing room only seats where I actually had feet painted sort of between the reds and the whites, I guess, in the corridor. And that's where you stood. Your ticket was there, and you stood there, and he'd get some cheap standing room only tickets. But he said, notice the crowd in Montreal. The men are dressed up, the women are dressed up, and it's an event. And Saturday night was electric in Montreal. And to me, there was nothing like it.
I couldn't agree more. Even watching it on television and I was in Maple Leaf Gardens at a couple games, and the air is just different there.
The air is different. The lights are brighter.
Yeah.
There's something else there, right? Okay, because we didn't have the luxury of going to these arenas, right? As kids.
Right.
And so when you finally get there, you realize what the bright lights are and the TV lights are and the atmosphere. My first game I ever saw as a boy was in Toronto. I was 13, and we were playing in Kitchener, Ontario. One of the dads grabbed me and said, with his son, took me to Toronto to see they were playing Buffalo. And I walked in that Maple Leaf Gardens. I was awestruck, and we were up high. But boy, talk about bright. And I'll never forget it.
I thought the same thing at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Yeah.
And the only time I was at I was there for 2 games, but it was the end of the season. They started the new rink in the middle of that season. Yeah. So I was there a couple games right before, and it was Wendell's last game in the Gardens. And I walked down the corridor, and they had the old pictures, the old black ones like Dave Keon and all these guys. And I looked out and I glanced out into the rink. And I just got tears in my eyes because it's like that's all you saw on Hockey Night in Canada growing up, and now you're there and you see it, and it's just. But I thought the same thing about the lights.
Right, me too. Yeah, me too. And I remember then playing junior there against the Marlies, and the bright lights weren't on. It was completely different. Still a great, vast. I mean, the mausoleum of hockey, right? But,
remember looking up, that's where Harold Ballard sat.
Oh, yeah,
the little box.
Exactly.
So my last question for you is, what is your current Tim Hortons order? That's I got to know these things.
So I do like going there for lunch the other time. I'm kind of a coffee drinker throughout the day, but honestly, if I'm my favorite thing, my dad likes the apple fritters. I probably like the maple frosted donut the best. I don't know why, but when I'm home, I'm in East Orange, I got to have something with maple syrup on it. So I'm a medium coffee with just milk and a maple frosted donut.
My dad,
and I'm a happy guy.
Yeah, my dad's an apple fritter guy. Oh yeah, he'll buy 2 and gobble those quickly.
Yeah, no chance.
Quickly.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all I got. Any final thoughts?
No, thanks. I'm still trying to remember the question that I was sort of rambling on back, but I'm trying to laugh.
Well, you'll wake up in the middle of the night and go,
all the time.
Just text me.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, that is all. Thank you guys for joining us this week. Thanks again, Jeff. Always a pleasure. You're always welcome on our
Sarina.
show. And we will see you guys next week when Rod's back from the Grey Cup. Have yourselves a wonderful week.